What the hell happened in Washington, D.C. today? By mid afternoon, there were hundreds, maybe, of individuals who had breached security at the Senate. They had invaded the chambers, they had prevented voting and speeches from taking place. And it's all over the news. It's been blanket wall to wall coverage on basically every news source that I can find on the internet for the past couple hours. I've been trying to follow it to the best of my ability. I've also been active on Twitter, tweeting sort of my reaction to what's happening. What I want to sort of look at right now is what actually happened today, what to call it, and what does this all mean? Full disclosure, I had another Quick Hits podcast ready to go for today, which had a very different message than the one that I'm going to give you today in light of what's happened in Washington, D.C. I'd referred to the arrest of the head of the Proud Boys. Apparently, he had been arrested for burning a Black Lives Matter flag. He'd been charged with a misdemeanor. And I used that fact to point out that if that's the worst that the so-called right-wing extremism movement, or rather movements in the United States, are capable of, that's pretty paltry. That's pretty. That's cheap beer. That's not nothing to. That's not anything really to worry about. I have decided to change that podcast for today, obviously, because of what happened. And what's amazed me over the past couple of hours is to look at what's happening on social media. And primarily, I'm talking about Twitter. There's been an awful lot of coverage on Twitter about the events from today in the United States Capitol. And there's a big argument on what to call the individuals who engaged in the action at the Senate, as well as what to call the action itself. So let me run through some of the terms that have been used today, and I'll weigh in on what I think is perhaps, as of 6 p.m. on Wednesday evening, January the 6th, what is perhaps the best term to encapsulate the actions from today. At a minimum, what happened today in DC was a riot. Hence, those involved in it were rioters. I did see some individuals on Twitter who had cited parts of the United States Criminal Code, calling this an insurrection, meaning these would be insurrectionists. I also saw individuals calling this a coup attempt. Here's where I'm going to push back a little bit. If you're going to carry out a coup against a democratically elected government, as we see happening far too often around the world, and the best you can do is carry a bunch of flags and a bunch of banners and occupy the democratic institutions, you're a pretty shitty coup maker. They didn't come fully armed. They didn't come, at least to date, with the intent of killing a whole bunch of people. To the best of my knowledge, there's been only one serious injury so far. It's a woman who was shot. And when I try to find out who she was and who shot her, I'm getting paltry information, dribs and drabs here and there. She may have been one of the protesters who was shot. Again, as of 6 p.m. on January the 6th, I don't know. I'm going to have to wait and see more information on who this person was. If this was a coup, this was a lousy coup. And the people doing it clearly had no idea how to do a coup. Looks like they couldn't organize a piss up in a bar. The last term that is being used to describe what happened today in DC is domestic terrorism. Again, I'm going to be a little cautious here in agreeing to call this terrorism for a couple of reasons. There's no question it was significant property damage. And yes, under many legal statutes around the world, an act of terrorism is serious violence against infrastructure, against buildings, against public places. So that's clearly, there was some damage, albeit how much? Well, the Senate's still standing. It wasn't taken down. A few windows were broken. Is that serious? People can disagree on that fact. What was it driven by? Well, it certainly seems that the individuals involved in the action today were probably Trump supporters at a minimum. They've been egged on by the president, including today, where he told them to go home, but it was a nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing. He basically congratulated them on doing what they were doing, saving the so-called stolen election that Joe Biden and the Democrats had somehow, pulled the rug under the American people and declared victory in his fake election. Is this a political agenda? Probably in parts. So, ergo, if it's serious violence and it's a political motivation, that could be classified as terrorism, and as the term the Americans use, domestic terrorism. So that I accept. But here's where I'm going to push back a little bit. Normally, when we talk about acts of terrorism, we talk about people being killed and people being injured. Yes, even in Canada, in the Canadian Criminal Code, there is talk about significant property damage. To me, though, if you carry out an act of terrorism and the worst you do is break some windows, you're not a very good terrorist. Terrorists seek to kill and to maim, and as an additional thing, they try to destroy property. It's as if we looked at 9/11 and said that the primary result of the 19 hijackers was the fact that the two towers came down and that a big hole was blown up in the side of the Pentagon, ignoring the fact that 3,000 people died. That's getting the cart before the horse. Terrorism is about death, it's about injury. Secondarily, it's about property damage. So I'm not quite sure that what happened today in Washington, D.C. was an act of terrorism, although I certainly would respect those who would push back on that. I don't think it was a coup attempt, unless these are the most incompetent coup plotters in the history of the planet. It definitely was a riot, and possibly was insurrection. I want to be careful here because it's still early. A curfew has just been declared in Washington as of 6 p.m. We'll see who lingers around. We'll see how much force is being deployed to get these people out of the Senate and get them away from the grounds. One more thing. A lot of criticism about Washington, D.C. law enforcement, that they did not come out in force to prevent this from happening. There were a lot of warnings this was going to happen on social media. Again, you got to be a little careful about this. There have been warnings about violence ever since Trump lost the election in November. Very little has happened since that time. I, for one, in the podcast you're not going to hear, was wondering if and when there would be any acts of violence carried out because of Trump's exhortation that his followers rescued the stolen election from the Democrats. Obviously, something has happened today. I recognize that. But the problem is, if you're law enforcement or security intelligence, this is just an average day at the office. You come across gazillions of messages and thousands of people who spout off this garbage online about take back the state or kill the kuffar or kill the fill in the blanks. And as I've shared with you on far too many occasions, and I hate to be repetitive, the vast majority of people who sound like big men on campus online couldn't organize the proverbial piss up in a bar. They just talk the talk. They're neither competent nor are they brave enough to do anything. In fact, most of them are just cowardly wankers. Could the police have been there in greater force? Absolutely. I did see that they called the National Guard and got assistance from Maryland and Virginia, I believe, as the day wore on. So they could have been better prepared. There's no question about that. And perhaps, there'll be some questions to be answered. And some people in very high positions of authority will have to satisfy why they didn't take more action in advance to prevent what happens. But again, this is a normal day at the office if you work in security intelligence or law enforcement. There are always far more people that say they're going to do something and do nothing than those that actually do it. It's not an exact science to figure out of the 1,000 people who post stupid shit online, which one's going to actually carry a firearm into the Senate or a baseball bat or whatever. It's still very much kind of a crapshoot. I'm sorry to say that. There are some efforts to develop tools to better understand this. They're still very much in the embryonic stages. Bottom line is, what happened in Washington, D.C. today was the direct result of President Trump's coddling and encouraging and lighting the fire into people about this. In fact, his own statement today reiterated this garbage about the stolen election. Donald Trump has to wear what happened in Washington today, his calls for peace notwithstanding. We still have to learn a lot more information about who was out there in the streets, what groups they represented, how many of them were actually armed, how many of them actually were prepared to carry out acts of violence against the democratically elected U.S. government. So far, the violence has been rather minimal. That may change in the days to come. I've heard a lot of commentators say, wait till January 21st when the inauguration takes place. Yeah, maybe. I'm sure you'll see a much greater police force on that day than you saw today in Washington. But my final advice to all of you who listen to me is just keep your powder dry. There's a lot of things we don't know just yet about what happened in D.C. today. Let's not jump the gun and call it terrorism or call it a coup. We simply don't have those facts in hand. Anyhow, that's what I think. What are your views on what happened in DC today? It is, at a minimum, it's a very, very sad day for US democracy when a scene that you normally associate with the third world, no disrespect intended, happens in the capital of the world's largest economy and what some call the sort of genesis of democracy. I hope it ends better. Love to hear from you. You can reach me on email, borealisrisk@gmail.com, or on Twitter @borealisaves. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. If you like this content and want to get more, please go to my website, borealisthreatandrisk.com, hit the subscribe button. You'll find all the information there to provide your email address. You'll get a free daily digest to your inbox every day. Before I forget, though, I almost forgot. I have to leave you with my Hardy Boys words of wisdom for the day. And this one comes from the Hooded Hawk Mystery. And here it goes. Joe and Frank Hardy, those boy detectives. Running in a zigzag manner will make you an elusive target. Let's hope that the rioters in Washington, D.C. don't read the Hardy Boys, because they'll be running in zigzag patterns to prevent being arrested.